The 10th Amendment limits the federal government to 30 enumerated powers specified in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. What, if any, legislation would you vote against that is not specifically enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, such as any past, present, or proposed legislation, for example, the National Defense Authorization Act?
From a standpoint of those powers that are enumerated, what I believe that we've got to do is stay strict to our Constitution and make sure that we don't vote to promulgate or to perpetuate our federal government from a standpoint of the powers that they have. We've used the Commerce Clause over and over again to expand it, whether it be education, whether it be commerce from a standpoint of being able to control subsidies. And what we've got to do is bring that back. One of the problems is years and years of jurisprudence from a standpoint of the Constitution, and what we've got is case law over and over and over again that people continue to look to and justify for further actions. Liberal justices will use that over and over again to come in and try to make sure that we have literally just a grab for power on a federal level. And so what I would say is that we've got to make sure that we come back with... Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. So what we need to do is we need to look at defining those things, those powers that are within the states' rights is continue to have states make the best decisions, local governments make the best decisions. The more limited we have the federal role of government, the better off we are. The closer that decision-making power is made to the actual local and state level, that's really where we need to be from a constitutional standpoint.
Okay, thank you on that. What do you know about Agenda 21? What parts are acceptable?
Well, Agenda 21 obviously has been signed, not ratified, but what we've got to look at is that really usurps our national sovereignty. And as we look at Agenda 21, the word sustainability or sustainable development may have a good connotation, but really what it is really a power grab by international powers. And if we look back at that, some of the root of Agenda 21 goes all the way back to where we get our clean water legislation from, a Ramsar Treaty that happened in 1974. If you were to Google Ramsar, it was Ramsar, Iran. And what we actually did was allowed that to usurp national sovereignty. And Agenda 21 is the same kind of approach, and we're using it under a sustainable development mentality. But really what we've got to do is it's more about environmentalists trying to come in, take control of our property rights and our ability to make decisions. And so what we've got to do is make sure that not only does that not get ratified, but we make sure that Congress doesn't allow that funding. Most of the funding right now is actually happening more on a local and state level as you look at it. And if you go around, what you'll find is a lot of that invades our property rights, and I would be strongly against that kind of legislation.
Thank you on that. What about jobs? What do you see as the government's role, if any, in job creation? To what would you attribute the high jobless rate? If you see no government role in job creation, how do you think the unemployment rate could be reduced? What can be done about joblessness?
Well, the private sector is the only one I know of that creates jobs. I've never found a job that's created on a governmental basis other than regulatory jobs, which right now makes up almost 20% of what we're spending is on government regulation. And so as we see that, I think that the private sector is the one that actually has to create jobs. What's the government's role in that? Get out of the way. Where we need to make sure of is that from a tax standpoint, we're taxing and regulating the private sector to death. And so what we've got to do is make sure that government gets out of the way. And if we do that, then what we will see, like we have before, we will see job flourish. So what can a congressman do? We can lower taxes from a corporate standpoint to create incentives. We can make sure that we put a moratorium on any new regulatory law, put sunset provisions on regulations where the regulators have to come back in and justify it again. But what I think we've got to do is make sure that we create an environment where truly government is not looked to as the job creator. One of the things that I found as a businessman is the unsure nature of what's coming down the pike. And the expectation that the government will provide a job is really part of our problem. If we look to the government for an answer and not the private sector, what we're going to do is end up all working for the government. Well, that will not sustain itself. As we look at this, as we go around the district, one of the things that concerns me is the lack of private sector incentives for a businessman. It's cheaper for me to open a business in Ireland than it is in the United States of America because of the taxes and regulations. Why would we do that? Why would we create a system that is so much easier for me to go abroad and make money? So we've got to do that, and I think if we do that, government's role, there's no role in it.
Okay. Thank you very much on that. Is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, good for America?
I find no reason why it's good for America in any sense. I mentioned the Commerce Clause earlier. They've used the Commerce Clause as a way to come in and force us to buy health insurance and have affordable health care. Well, one is it won't be affordable. And another is truly, if we allow them to say you've got to buy health insurance, what would stop them from saying, okay, well, we own GM, so you've got to buy a GM car? I mean, we've gotten to the point where if we allow the Commerce Clause to truly trigger that, then we're in trouble. I don't see anything that's good that comes out of Obamacare other than the fact that hopefully we will be able to repeal it. And in that, that's where I'm different from Mr. Schuler. He voted, at first he didn't vote, and then he said, well, he voted against Obamacare, but when it came time to repeal it, he didn't vote for the repeal. And so I think that we've got to do that, not only from a health care standpoint, but also to make sure that we uphold the Constitution.
And if you repealed Obamacare, would you go back to the old system, or what would you do?
Well, I think what we've got to do is find an alternative for more competitive health care. As we look at that, part of that is insurance, being able to have insurance across state lines and make it competitive. Again, the private sector kicking in. The other thing that we need to look at from a healthcare perspective is to radically modify Medicaid in the way that we do it. And as we look at that, hopefully that's something that they're taking up on a state level as we start to reform Medicaid and use block grants versus the current way that we're addressing that. But I think that we've got to make it more competitive, make it where we take a personal responsibility. I remember when my wife and I, when we were having children, our second child, when we didn't have insurance, we managed our health care. And what we did is, instead of it costing us $5,000 to have a child, we went in the night after. I said, just breathe heavy, breathe heavy. But as we look at that, we actually went in later and we managed our health care costs. And so $5,000, 18 months later, got reduced down to $1,700 for the same delivery. And here's the thing is, we don't go in and ask about health care costs. We ask how much we pay for grapes, how much we pay for apples. But when you go in to get your health care, you give them a card, it gets paid for, and you have no idea what it costs. We need to make sure that we take back braces that you can buy for $89 at Walmart and don't spend $800 on it from a health insurance standpoint. We need to have personal responsibility.